is we believe in the importance of copyright and copyright exceptions, including them in trade agreements as a way of facilitating internet commerce. We understand that localization is a difficult term for a lot of countries, and we do not take the position that localization is a black and white issue. We believe that there are some instances where requiring local data is actually important, and we support that. And finally, as I said before, we do believe that the trade agreements and the trade negotiation process should be inclusive, understanding, of course, that these are negotiations. And this is not the trade negotiations are not a multi-stakeholder they're not a part of a multi-stakeholder organization where everything can be out in the open. So, for example, we understand that governments sometimes need to keep trade agreements and trade negotiations secret. We do believe that there is an opportunity, though, for governments to provide some transparency in their negotiating processes. So that's where we are.
Thank you very much for that insight to the extent it's possible to the Trump administration. And as you've been hearing, the source code proposals at the WTO are actually a proposal for stronger intellectual property protection. We call it TRIPS Plus on trade secrets. And of course, as you heard from Michael, the least developed countries don't even have to do the existing level of intellectual property protection. But just down the road here in Geneva is the World Intellectual Property Organization, a UN body, where they negotiate intellectual property rules in basically a multi-stakeholder format. I'm an NGO. With this badge, I can walk in, I can sit in the negotiations, I can get the texts, I can speak after the governments, and I can watch the whole negotiations and give input, negotiating the same intellectual property rules that are now being proposed in the free trade agreements and even in the WTO in the name of e-commerce, things like stronger trade secrets protection. So, and in WIPO, they managed to conclude agreements, even though it's public and it's multi-stakeholder. So I don't think it's necessarily that this has to be done in secret or they can't reach a deal. I mean, the climate change negotiations are done in public, they reach a deal. So this is not, some military nuclear technology. This is trade rules. There's nothing inherently secret about it. But our last speaker, now we move to Asia, is Parminderjeet Singh from India from IT for Change. And then after that, I promise we will open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Sanya. Going to this, the question which frames the title of the workshop, is e-commerce good for developing countries? We need to kind of interrogate what do you mean by e-commerce, which we are talking about whether it's good or not. And it's a very strange term. It's kind of a placeholder for so many things that it really is more or less meaningless in the sense that it means very different people to different people. The e-commerce, so let me try to see it from a few angles. The e-commerce, when we say e-commerce is good or bad for developing countries, generally the e-commerce we are talking about as it is used at global venues, trade venues mostly. And that's where this word e-commerce became fashionable. It's very different in its meaning in terms of people going to Amazon and buy things, and that's how they see e-commerce. Jack Ma, the owner of Alibaba, is one of the world's biggest ambassadors of this term e-commerce globally. He's a brand ambassador of e-commerce for UNCTAD. He's got into a recent relationship with WTO, bandying this word e-commerce out there as things which will change the whole world. Now, very interestingly, Jack Ma himself, in his own company's strategy papers, say that e-commerce is a very transient term and will vanish soon. He says it's just a ferry to the other bank. Now, that's very strange that if something is so transient and going to vanish, we are putting all our stakes on that term. And rather than, therefore, talking about the ferry, we should be talking about what's that other bank which this ferry is taking us to, which, strangely, Jack Ma does not talk too much about at UNCTAD or at WTO. So what really we are talking about, and he himself then describes that this new thing is new retail along with new logistics, new payments, new manufacturing, and there's another new, there are 5 news. So basically, we know there's a lot of stuff changing. And what we are here talking about is the digitalization which is taking place across all aspects of the society. Everything is getting changed, and economy is one part of it. But we know that change is taking place around us. And to put this convenient term e-commerce on the top of it and describing it as the e-commerce and then say whether it's good for developing countries or not is rather disingenuous in many ways. Now, interestingly, there's another way I'd like to try to put it. At WTO, from which meeting many of us are coming back from, it was developed countries which were insisting that there should be e-commerce rules as soon as possible, and they were telling developing countries that you are looking backwards if you don't accept e-commerce, because e-commerce is good for everybody, so why are you not wanting e-commerce rules? And developing countries said, no, we don't want them right now, because there are some issues which Mike and Fernando did explain. Very strangely, in this same building, there is another group under the UN Commission on Science and Technology for Development, which is called a Working Group for Enhanced Cooperation, which is right now deliberating whether there should be an institution for making global policies and rules for the digital society. And in that body, developed countries says that we don't need an institution and we need no rules. And there are developing countries who are saying, no, let's set up an institution at least to start talking about public policy issues and rules in digital society. So it's funny that we need e-commerce rules, but we do not want digital society rules. And this example shows how this has become a kind of a football, a geopolitical football, which is seen in very different meanings by different people. Even within the WTO rubric, China means by e-commerce something very different than what US and other groups mean. For China, it's largely manufactured goods which they have an excess capacity of, and they want to open up new markets for it. And for US, they're really not wanting a Walmart 2 version through e-commerce platforms. They have suffered it enough. And what they are looking for in the term e-commerce is digital data flows. They're very different things. And both of them use the term e-commerce. So I think I've given so many instances of why this term is really not useful to be used any longer. China is not even a part of those 43 countries which got together to form a group within the WTO to promote e-commerce negotiations. So really, we need to therefore understand what is it that is happening society-wide, what does it mean in terms of the economy, and where do developing countries stand in relation to that. So we all agree that everything is changing, all sectors of the economy are changing. And we need to interrogate what is digital economy, what is digital business, what are the core business models, and where do therefore marginalized people in developing countries stand in relation to it. I look at it in this manner. I think it's as big as industrialization. Industrialization put machine power at the center of digital economy, at the center of the economy. The machine power was around what all economic relations reorganize themselves. That's what industrialization was. And equally now, digitalization is when digital intelligence becomes a fulcrum of all economic relationships. And everything reorganizes around digital intelligence. And as factory was the central economic institution in the industrialization era, platforms working on data, producing digital intelligence, is the central institution of the digital economy. And it's not e-commerce. Because Uber, for example, in US, which is promoting the e-commerce discourse, domestically, people don't call Uber as e-commerce. Normally, e-commerce term is reserved only for Amazon kind of things. Uber and Airbnb are not e-commerce, and that's a big part of what is happening. I mean, again, this term is wrong, therefore. What happens is there's a new kind of digital intelligence owning company, which now sits at the top of the value chains. Long back, if you own the factories, you were at the top of the value chain. Then came a time when you own the intellectual property, you are one step higher. You don't even need to own the industries, and you sat at the top of the value chains. And now, if you own data-based digital intelligence, you are sitting at one level higher. So I'm just trying to say by all this, the developing countries do understand that enormous amount of changes are taking place. They are not trying to drag their feet. They're not trying to look back to the past. They know things are changing. But issue here is not whether developing countries are for e-commerce or against. Issue here is when a new game is open, who sets the rules of the game? Who frames the game? Who gives the vocabulary to the new game? And this game is being tried to be captured by North by using commercial, convenient terms like e-commerce, free flow of data, against data localization, and these are all become convenient terms of framing the discourse in a certain manner to capture that space for their own economic advantage. And developing countries are saying, no, we don't accept this framing. We want alternative framing. So the fight is for framing here. The fight is not, I'm against e-commerce and you are for e-commerce. So that's completely a wrong description. A lot of people, one of the main things when you use the word e-commerce and global venues, you're basically trying to say there should be free flow of data. That's what this term covers. Now, why free flow of data? My colleague at Yunus was talking, why not equal and free access to data? Doesn't it look good? Are those people ready to say that there should be free and equal access to data? They aren't. But they want free flow of data. And you can see the disingenuity here. Data is a resource, and therefore equal and free access to it should be talked about, not free flow, because free flow can be theft. Free flow means that my data can be stolen by somebody else, and that's the kind of theft which is taking place when societies and nations who have their own data, which is an essential resource to reorganize their economies, their societies, their government systems, and that should be freely flowing to another country. Now, that's, for me, a theft. Why don't we say that all data should be equally and freely available to everyone? Why can't we change the framing to that? Why don't we talk about ownership of data rather than free flow of data? So I'm just trying to posit all these to say that the way it is being framed, that some people are being good, they are looking to the future, and others are looking to the past and are Luddites, is not the way. If we really want to go together into a digital society and a digital economy in a fair and just manner, we should all sit together and frame the rules and the vocabulary in a just and equal manner. And that is where we should start talking about digital industrial policies. And Mike talked about how, like, if traditional industrialization required every country to look at its own situation, the role of the public sector, role of the private sector, the nature of small industry, in the same way, countries have to look at the role of the public sector in their local data economy, the private sector, public digital infrastructures, public data infrastructure. So this is the kind of complex we have to be talking about, and this convenient terms of e-commerce, free flow of data, covers more rather they reveal, and we should make a new start, therefore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with that, you've heard about the distinction between e-commerce, the concept, buying stuff online, already $22 trillion a year, and the proposed rules in the name of e-commerce at the World Trade Organization, which is not a multi-stakeholder forum, and some in this room have been disaccredited from its latest meeting. So with that, we open the floor to questions. We'll take a few. Please announce your name and organization, and we'll finish by 10:30 sharp because I know you all need to get to other sessions. Please, we start here.
Thank you, Richard Hill, civil society activist. I like to wear camouflage. My colleagues here have said everything that I could think of saying more than once very well. There's just one point that Parminder made, which only Parminder said, and I wish to stress that particular point. Parminder and I and many others here have been involved in any number of discussions of internet issues over the past 20 years, is it, Parminder? And make no mistake about it, the e-commerce agenda in WTO is just internet governance. There are topics like spam, free flow of data, etc. It's really the same discussion. So in the forums we're in, the countries from the north always say, well, there's nothing to discuss, everything is fine. And anyway, if there are discussions, it has to be fully multi-stakeholder. And so I was very surprised and astonished and, in fact, outraged, to be honest, when I see now that it's proposed to discuss these very same topics in WTO, which is the least open and least inclusive of any of these intergovernmental forums. Some of you remember the outrage in 2012 when internet issues were proposed to be discussed in ITU, which is not fully multi-stakeholder, but for sure it's a lot more multi-stakeholder than is WTO. as Sonia pointed out, WIPO is also considerably more multi-stakeholder. So why are these very same countries arguing one thing in one forum and another in a different forum? And some of you are here. I'm not going to name names, but some of these countries are here. So please, let's have a minimum of consistency. If these discussions should be multi-stakeholder, then we don't do them in WTO or in the plurilaterals, at least not until those forums are significantly transformed and tackle some of the basic real issues which several of the speakers mentioned. How can you talk about e-commerce when you don't have E? First, these countries need to have the digital infrastructure that they need, and then we can start discussing e-commerce and rules for e-commerce. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have one online, and then I'll come to you. So the online question, could somebody read it out for us, please? We have people watching very patiently online, and I think they've asked a question.
So this is the question for Michael. How can we overcome the challenges of e-commerce as this varies across the regions?
And there was one more here, I think, that will collect the question, and one more at the back, and then we'll answer them all and let you go on time.
Thank you. I mean, listening to the panel and also drawing from the work of our organization, which is pretty recent in this area, I'd like to point out that much of this is really about discourse shaping. You know, there is a lot of managing by fear, and I find many spurious research papers put out there, and I think we really need to question it, including methodologically. And this links back to what happened 2 years ago in the free basics debate of Facebook. I'm told that at the WTO, and you will know better for the delegates who have attended it, that there was a comment from one of the developed countries that this failure of e-commerce actually means you guys are condemned to your misery. Referring to the developing countries and their intransigence. Or seeming intransigence. A similar statement was made by Facebook in India when the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India said no to free basics. So they said, you guys are condemned to your misery. And I really find this power of the discourse, especially in this research paper, which is cited left, right, and center. And this paper comes from European Center for International Political Economy, SAP. And SAP's paper, I think, is a recipe for disaster because it just bases itself on saying that data localization is going to lead to so much loss of trade and investment. It's going to be so disastrous for productivity that GDP is going to go down. I mean, it's based on no facts, and I really think that we need an alternative discourse to reshape all of this.
Thank you very much. And the question at the back, and then we'll come to the panel for answers. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Basically, it's not a question, it's suggestions. From the today's sessions, from the speaker and from the literature and the documents which we receive at the desk, it is found that the current rules of WTO are outdated, and it covers the e-commerce dynamics, and it was informed by the speaker from the current sessions that 6 countries are dominating in the e-commerce market, and it is also the fact that developing countries are still struggling to boost the e-commerce in their respective countries, and they are devising their e-commerce rules to mitigate e-commerce challenges such as dispute resolutions, consumer protections, personal data protections, logistics, and taxations. My suggestion is that there is a dire need to work on how it is possible that we take developing countries on board so that they are equally participate as developed countries and contribute in formulating e-commerce, global strategy, and documents, particularly in the revision of the WTO rules. Thank you.
And could you introduce yourself, sir? Which organization?
This is Iftikhar Shah from Ministry of IT, Government of Pakistan.
Thank you. So we have a number of questions here, and one of them that was one of the issues that was raised was data localization. And actually, I've been doing some research, and countries like New Zealand require tax records to be stored locally. If they're on the cloud, they have to be stored on a server in New Zealand, so that in a tax evasion investigation, they can actually walk in and get them and don't have to try and get them from some other country. Similarly, the US, in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, wanted to reserve the right to store financial data locally, because in the 2008 financial crisis, when Lehman Brothers collapsed, they had data stored in Hong Kong. The IT servers were switched off when they went bankrupt. bankrupt, the IT people were fired, they couldn't get the data out of the Hong Kong servers to unwind Lehman Brothers positions, for example, before the market reopens. So there are a number of situations where, I mean, obviously the US Department of Defense says that their data must be stored in the US for national security reasons. So this debate needs to cover, I think, all the different ministries. I calculated that the proposed e-commerce rules at the WTO affect 13 different government ministries and areas of law. It's not just an IT question. It's about tax, financial regulation, competition laws, pacemaker medical device regulation, environmental laws, climate change convention. It affects all of these things. And so the question is, would these proposals in the WTO help? And I turn to any of our panel who want to tackle any of these questions. You have 2 minutes, I'm afraid, before we need to give up the room for another session. Who would like to go first? David?
So I'll go first. I agree with you. I think that, and as I said in my opening remarks, that the term data localization, it can't be something that's black and white, right? There has to be some agreement on when governments and when individuals and individual companies can store data locally. I think that that's part of, I think, what your comment was about needing to describe the issues that we're talking about specifically and not using a broad term like e-commerce to cover all of these issues.
Yeah, so yes, one is that we need to give up these convenient labels, e-commerce, free flow of data. World has become more sophisticated. People are up to speed on issues. They are not fools. Now sit down to a serious conversation. What is economy. What is information-related rights is information-related rights. There are overlaps, but these are very complex things. So data localization, free flow of data, they are convenient things. We should not, we should leave them and become more nuanced. The question which was asked by the online participant is that, yeah, I mean, I just take from the question that things are so varied across different regions and how can one deal with these things? And I think the only answer I can give is that they're so varied. It's like economies, agriculture economies and industrial economies. They're all very different in all countries. In the same way, digital economies are also very different, and they have to therefore be looked at from a local, national, regional perspective, along with the global, and we can't simply say there's a global model and this is it, and that's everybody should be doing it. The question which my friend from Pakistan Ministry of IT talked about, and yes, I think developing countries need to be got on board. I know Pakistan is very active to promote the e-commerce conversation at UNCTAD, for instance, and they are the ones who have been saying, yes, we need to take stock of this, but again, we should frame it in our manner and sit as equals on the tables, and that has been quite a struggle on which we should continue to put up. But we should bring our own frameworks to the table, and we have a paper outside on digital industrial policies, and these kind of conversations are important, and UNCTAD, I think, is a very good place. Thank you.
1 minute response each from Uganda and Bolivia, and then we need to enter the room for the next session.
Thank you very much. Mine goes to the online question. How can we overcome the challenges on e-commerce? I think the first thing is that do not agree to bad rules, because it's not going to unwrite itself. Don't agree to any bad rules. But most importantly, we need to build a digital infrastructure. We need to scale ourselves. We need to put in place the requisite institutional and regulatory frameworks that will be able to help our own industries to thrive. And I think this is what is really important. Let's not rush into rules. Our experience from the Uruguay Round Agreements shows us that we made mistakes in the past. We shouldn't write new rules that will cripple our development in the next century. Thank you.
Thank you, Bolivia. 1 minute, and then we'll close.
I think to improve the situation of developing countries, there are many issues that we can work on, but I just would like to refer to 3. Capacity creation, financial support and development of infrastructure, and I don't think that these issues are going to be resolved at WTO. Maybe UNCTAD or some other place could be better to discuss e-commerce in these issues. Thank you.
Much, and there are more materials outside, and good luck with the rest of the IGF.